So hello, assalamu alaikum. In today's video or in today's short class, we're discussing about the greatest common factor or the GCF, as you would like to say, the concept of greatest common factor or GCF. What do you understand by the concept of greatest common factor? You know the meaning of factor. What is a factor? A factor is a number which actually divides another number. Another, if a number is divisible by a number, that means that number is the factor of the number. For instance, you have 4 and I give you a number 2 and I ask you, is 2 a factor of 4? How do you check it? You divide 4 by 2, and if it returns you a whole number value, that means 2 is a factor of 4. So when you divide 4 by 2, you get what? 4 divided by 2 gives you 2. So that means yes, 2 is a factor of 4. So from this thing we get the concept that if a term or if a number is divisible by a specific number, let's imagine that if number 1 is divisible by number 2, that means number 2 is a factor of number 1. All right. And when we are talking about the concept of greatest common factor or GCF, that means it should be the largest number which divides your expression or binomial. If we are talking specifically about the binomial, the polynomials, so in your polynomials or your binomial expression, a number which divides both of your binomial terms should be your greatest common factor. Just have a look. Just let's have a look at it. What do we mean by this thing? So for example, I have a number. I have a question like this, which is 12x minus 20. All right. So in this case, we have just one variable term and one simple constant term. I'm going to talk about when you have two variable terms. Over here, you have just one variable term, which is 12x, and one constant is negative 20. But I'm going to talk about when you have two variable terms, and that is going to be the type 2. I'm going to explain it to you just in a few minutes. So looking at this thing, you have 12x minus 20. The first thing which is going to come to your mind is that it can be divisible by 6. No, it cannot be divisible by 6. Yes, 12x can be divisible by 6, but not negative 20. You need a number, a larger number, the largest possible number, which can divide both of your terms, not just your single term. In this scenario, we need a number which is actually the greatest number which can divide both your 12x as well as your negative 20. That is going to be which number? For sure, it is going to be 4. If you divide it by 4 and if you divide this thing by 4, what do you get? You get 3x from this and negative 5 from this. All right, that's it. So we figured out that what is going to be the greatest common factor in this case. The greatest common factor, the GCF, is going to be 4. And what is the way of factoring out from a binomial? The proper way of writing it is that the proper way of writing factoring out is that you write your GCF, which is 4, over here, then you apply parenthesis, and what do you have to write inside the bracket? It is going to be the number you get when you divide 12x by 4 and negative 20 by 4. Basically, when you divide both of them by 4, what do you get? You get, we just discussed it, we just figured it out, it is 3x minus 5. So this is how you factor out your greatest common factor from a binomial. And in order to check whether you have done it correctly, what do? You just multiply 4 multiplied by 3x, you get 12x. 4 multiplied by negative 5, you get negative 20. So that means you have done it correctly without any errors. You get 12x, you get negative 20, which is the same as the above scenario, right? This is the concept of greatest common factor. Just remember, just stick to the core principle. What is greatest common factor? What is factor? Factor is a number which can divide your given number. Like I gave you the example of 4 and I asked you, is 2 a factor of 4? And how did you check it? You divided 4 by 2. That means 4 is divisible by 2. That explains that yes, 2 is a factor of 4. In this case, how did we check that 4 is the greatest common factor? We saw that yes, 4 divides both this 12x as well as this negative 20. That means 4 is a factor. And how did we figure it out that it is the greatest common factor for both? Is that any number beyond 4 would not divide both your terms. We looked at 6, we looked at 5. If you divide by 5, you'll get a whole number for negative 20 but not for 12. So in this scenario, the greatest common factor would just be 4. And how do you write it? You write the greatest common factor outside the parenthesis, you open the parenthesis, and what do you write inside the box is what you get after dividing both of your numbers by the greatest common factor. In this case, we divided both of them by 4 and we got 3x for this side, and negative 20 divided by 4 gave you negative 5 for this side. That is simple. All right, let's move on to type 2. Type 2. So I said in type 2, for instance, look at this question. You have 6x squared plus 18x. So you just look it and you get the concept that yeah, we have 6 and 18. What do you have to do when you have two variable terms? This is going to be the core tip for solving the questions ahead. What do you look when you have two variables? You have 6x to the power 2 and plus 18x to the power 1. So when you have two variables, you are just gonna ignore the variables for a second. You're not gonna ignore them throughout the question, just for a second. You're gonna look at the numbers first, the constants first. You see 6 and 18. What do? You look the number, the greatest common factor which can divide. If you see at 3, yeah, 3 can divide both of them. But is 3 the greatest common factor as well? Isn't there a number greater than 3 which can divide them both? And the answer is yes, there is a number greater than 3, and that is 6. So 6 can divide both 6 and 18, right? We are looking at the constants, the numbers first, the 6 and 18. So yeah, we write 6 over here as the greatest common factor. Now we look at the variables. What are the variables? You have x to the power 2 and x to the power 1. How are you going to figure out? You always look at the variable having the smaller power. In this case, which is the smaller power? It is x to the power 1. And you can figure it out by another method, that is, you have x to the power 2 and x to the power 1. And don't you think that both of these terms are having x to the power 1 as common in them? X to the power 2 and x to the power 1, what do they have? They have 1x common in them, right? How do you get x to the power 2? You get x to the power 2 by multiplying x by x. And what is x to the power 1? It is simply x. So if you see both of them, what is common in them? Common is this, like just x is common in them. So that means both of these variables have just one x common in them. So we write it over here, 6x. So our greatest common factor in total will be 6x. You repeat the process, you know the core principles. Open the bracket, parenthesis, 6x. Perfect. What are you going to write inside the bracket is multiply both of the divide both of your binomial, express the values, the terms given to you by the greatest common factor. Number 1, if you divide 6x squared by 6x, what do you get? 6 cancelled out. X to the power 2 minus x to the power 1. You know that in multiplication you add and in division you subtract, so you get just x to the power 1, right? So you go here and put just x to the power 1, or it's just simply x. Perfect. What is your second term? The second term is 18 x to the power 1. You divide it by your greatest common factor, which is 6x, right? This gets cancelled. This gets 3. And x to the power 1 minus x to the power 1 minus 1. What do you get? Because when you're dividing, you subtract the powers. You get x to the power 0. And anything to the power of 0 is equivalent to 1. So that simply gives you what? It simply gives you, just look at this sign as well. Over here it is positive, write it as positive. If it was negative, you would have written it as negative. So you write it positive because you have been given positive in the question. So you got 3 from here and you write 3 over here. So this is how you actually factor out your greatest common factor. If they have asked you just to give the greatest common factor, then the answer would be 6x, just 6x. But if the question has asked you to factor out the greatest common factor, then this whole is going to be the process. And in order to check if you have done it correctly, what are you going to do? You're going to multiply both terms by the greatest common factor, which is outside. So if you multiply 6x by x, you get 6 to the power 2, 6x to the power 2. And if you multiply 6x by 3, you get what? Plus 18x. So look, aren't they the same thing? 6x to the power 2 plus 18x to the power 1 and 6x to the power 2 plus 18x to the power 1. So this is how you actually factor out your greatest common factor and you figure out which is your greatest common factor. Just look, just remember this step when you're doing for the constants. When you have variable terms, two variable terms, firstly do it for the constants, the numbers, and for numbers we got 6. And then look at the variables, look at the smaller power of x, and in this case we have the smaller power of x as x to the power 1. So we wrote x to the power 1 is the common factor in both of them. So the total common factor, the amalgamated, the combined greatest common factor is going to be 6x. And I told you how we got just x is that x squared, x to the power 2 is x multiplied by x, and x to the power 1 is simply x. So what do they have in common? It is just 1x. So we wrote it like this, and that is the process. You have an example like 14x squared minus 35x to the power 1. Simple. This is an easy one. What do? Look at the numbers first. 14 and 35. What is the table they are common in? The greatest common factor. You think about it and you come to the point that, yeah, 7 is going to be the number which divides them both. The largest number is going to be the 7. So what do? You write 7 over here and you look, it has x to the power 2 and this has x to the power 1, and you realize that yes, both of them at least have 1x common in them. So you write x over here, and what do you get to get 14x square? What are you going to write inside the bracket to get 14x square? Or you can interpret this as this as well. When we have figured out the greatest common factor is 7x, what do? You just divide it both terms by 7x. Just do this, divide both terms by 7x. What do you get over here? You get 14, this gets 1, this gets 2, and 2 minus 1, because I told you that when we divide the variables, they actually, when you multiply variables, they add up, and when you divide variables, they subtract. So 2 minus 1 is going to give you just 1. So what are you going to be left with? It is going to be 2x. Clear? 2x, x to the power 1. 2 minus 1 is x to the power 1. So 2x from this side, and 7 times 1, 7 times 5. 1 minus 1 gives you 0, and anything to the power of 0 is 1 itself. So you are just going to get negative 5. So what is going to be inside your box? It is going to be 2x minus 5. And if you write 2x minus 5, just look, do you get this thing back? Just cross check, do you get this thing back? 7x times 2x, you get 14x squared. Perfect. 7x times negative 5, you get negative 35x to the power 1. And that is a concept. Now let's move on to a little denser question. Just know that your basics, your fundamental ground rules are the same no matter how difficult the question is. Your ground rules, your basic fundamental principles are going to be the same for every question. So if I give you the question 36x to the power 5 minus 63x to the power 3. So in the beginning we were dealing with just the maximum power was 2, but at this scenario and in this question you have the maximum power as 5. we're going to look what we're going to do. The basic principles are going to be the same. I told you that the fundamental rules are always going to be the same for every question. You don't have to get confused by the power of the question. If you have x to the power 18, x to the power 27, x to the power 50, that just simply does not matter, because you're going to apply your fundamental, your basic principles. That's it. You are always going to get the correct answer. You just look at this question. What is going to be the largest number which divides both this 36? The first step is to look at the numbers, not at the variables. It is, if you look at 36 and 63, what is the largest number which divides both of them? And you come to the point and you realize that yes, 9 is going to be the largest number which divides both your 36 as well as 63. When you divide 36 by 9, you get 4, and when you divide 63 by 9, you get 7, and there is not a greater number greater than 9 which divides both of them. So you say, all right, from the number side I have 9 as the greatest value which can divide them both. Now you look at x to the power 5 and x to the power 3, and you realize, and you come to the step that yeah, what was the basic principle, what was the fundamental rule which I told you? And it was that you always look at the number or the side having the smaller power of x. In this scenario, which number, what is the smallest power of x? The smallest power of x is x to the power 3, because over here you have x to the power 5. So that means both of these numbers at least have 3x. Like, just imagine it, and these both numbers at least have x to the power 3, at least, because this side have x to the power 5. What do we mean by x to the power 5? Let me explain you a little more deeper. What do you mean by x to the power 5? X to the power 5 means x multiplied by x multiplied by x multiplied by x multiplied by x. 1 2 3 4 5. Yeah. And what do you mean by x to the power 3? X multiplied by x multiplied by x. So if you see, you have 3 x's on this side, and you take 3 from here common. So this shows both of them have at least x to the power 3 as common. So you just go and simply write it with your 9 which you got earlier, 9x to the power 3. So your greatest common factor for this question is going to be 9x to the power 3. Now what are you going to write inside the parenthesis to get back 36x to the power 5 and negative 63x to the power 3? I told you can either do it like directly, or what you can do is, you got your greatest common factor, you take both of the numbers, you take 36x to the power 5 first, and you divide it by 9x to the power 3. This is the greatest common factor which we got, right? So you divide by the greatest common factor and you will get the value which you have to put inside your parenthesis, your bracket. So you divide it by this, you get 9 times 1, 9 times 4, 5 minus 3 is going to give you 2. So what do you have? You have 4x to the power 2 from this side. Perfect. Now you go to the second step, and it is going to be, what is your second number? It is negative 63x cube. Negative 63x to the power 3. You divide it by 9x to the power 3. And what is going to happen? This 9 times 1, 9 times 7, x to the power 3 minus x to the power 3. You are left with x to the power 0, and anything to the power 0 is automatically 1. So what you are left from this is negative 7. Just negative 7. Do not ignore this negative sign, otherwise you're going to get the answer incorrect. So what do you have? You have 4x squared and negative 7. Just pick these two values and write it inside the parenthesis. I told you earlier that you can do this either directly, or for your clearance, if you are at the earlier stages, you can do it by dividing both of the numbers by greatest common factor to get the values which you have to put inside. So the last step is going to check. We are going to check, did we do it correctly? If we have done it correctly, we are going to get this thing back. You multiply 9 by 4, you get 36. Perfect. What do you get? You get 36. If you multiply x to the power 3 multiplied by x to the power 2, I told you when variables get multiplied, the powers get added up. They get added up. They are added up. So x to the power 3 multiplied by x to the power 2. What are you going to do? You're going to add the powers. 3 plus 2 is 5, x to the power 5. Perfect. 9 multiplied by 7 is what? 9 multiplied by negative 7 is what? Negative 63. Do you have a variable with 7? Do you have an x term with 7? No. So automatically this x cube is going to come. Perfect. Simple. This is simple. This is simple mathematics. Simple rules. Nothing complex. Nothing rocket science. Just simple things. So you get 36 x to the power 5 minus 63 x to the power 3. 63 x to the power 3. So just compare it with what you have been given in the question. Does it match? Yeah, for sure it matches. So that means you have factored out the greatest common factor in the correct way. And this is how you solve this question. I hope you understood the concept. It is not difficult. It is not complex. The number one rule which I told you at the beginning and which I would conclude my video with is that just stick to your basic principles, to your fundamentals, and to the simple rules which we apply for solving the questions. The rules are always going to be the same. The fundamentals, the basic principles are always going to be the same, no matter which power of x or what number do you get in your binomial. Just remember the basic principles, the basic rules. Look at the constant, the numbers. Like you have 36 and 63 in this case. Just look at them first. Find the greatest common factor of 36 and 63, which is 9. Then look at the variables, x to the power 5, x to the power 3. Look them, and then you realize that at least both of them are going to have x to the power 3, right? And I showed you how as well. And we have looked at the logic behind this as well. You can see both of them at least have x to the power 3 in common. So what is your greatest common factor be? It is going to be 9x to the power 3. 9 was the one which we got from the numbers, the constants, and x to the power 3 was the greatest common factor which we got from the variables. So our amalgamated or total greatest common factor is 9x to the power 3. Now we open the parenthesis because this is the process of factoring out. This is the process of factoring out your greatest common factor. We found the greatest. If the question has just asked you to find the greatest common factor, you give this answer. But if the question has asked you to factor out the greatest common factor, then you have to give it in this way. This is the correct way. Otherwise, you're not going to get the marks for it. So I told you can either do it directly, or what you can do is divide both of your terms by the greatest common factor, which we have found it before this step. What do you get from this side? You get 4x squared. What do you get from this step? You get negative 7. Open the parenthesis, put it as this. Done. The last step, multiply 9x cube by both of these terms and check whether you get the same answer. You multiplied this, you got this. You multiplied this with this and you got this. Compared it with your answer and that was the same. That means you have done everything correctly. That's it for today. This was the concept of greatest common factor. We will discuss more about this in our next video or in our next class, and that's it. I hope you understood the concept. It is a really easy concept. Just stick to your basic principles. This is the best advice for the day. Thank you.